Brett Sickett and Washee Forrest are a couple from Kansas who wed in Bass Beach. The newlyweds planned the perfect life. They moved to the city of Kingman, bought a house, and had 2 children. They each had a favorite job and established careers. But like any fairy tale, their story also came to an end. Over time, outwardly harmonious relationships ceased to correspond to reality. The spouses quarreled and reconciled, even tried to go to joint psychotherapy. However, the events that occurred on the night of April 30th, 2011, put the final point in their story. Brett and Washee met back in high school. The girl stood out among her friends with her beauty, and her boyfriend was an excellent athlete. They loved each other very much and were always together. In 2004, they got married and decided to settle in Brett's hometown. All the neighbors considered them a model family. They had 2 sons, 4-year-old Brandon and 2-year-old Bronson. Brett worked as a deputy sheriff and also taught at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Washee was building a successful career at Cox Communications. No one around them doubted that they had a wonderful family. However, the problems that began from the early days of dating grew with each passing year. Brett began to control Washee from the very beginning. At first, it was light pressure, but as time went on, his overbearing nature only intensified. He was jealous and suspected her of cheating on him, and Washee tried to please in everything. She was a kind and cheerful woman, took care of the family, respected her husband, and tried to keep peace in the house, but gradually lost herself in the marriage. According to her friends, she had changed a lot in recent years. She became thoughtful and unsociable. Later, it turned out that Brett restricted her communication with loved ones, not wanting to share her with someone else. Washee could only call or see her family when he was away. In addition, Brett had a beef with her work. Washee was a hard worker and often stayed late at work, which caused conflict at home. Brett was not supportive of her pursuit of career advancement, believing that he earned enough to support his family, but Washee was of a different opinion. She wanted to be independent and contribute to the family budget, plus she just loved her job. However, the constant strain of family, work, and worries began to take a toll on her mental health. Eventually, she fell into depression, which was exacerbated by pills prescribed by her doctor. Brett believed that her tiredness after work was having a major impact on her emotional state, but it was unclear whether it was the work or the constant arguments at home that was undermining her more. Washee began seeing a therapist, and in November 2010, she enrolled in couples counseling in an attempt to improve her relationship with her husband. However, the problems in the marriage were only getting worse. Washee was also worried about her appearance. Her weight was increasing due to hormonal disorders, and doctors prescribed her special medications. However, these medications had side effects: fatigue, irritability, and anxiety. Perhaps the treatment only aggravated her depression and led to negative thoughts. Despite this, she tried to fight and move forward. A few days before the tragedy, she saw a lawyer and signed divorce papers. Washee wanted custody of the children, but would not prevent them from having contact with their father on one condition: the meetings must take place in her presence. The fact is that Brett was abusive not only to her, but also to the children. Despite their age, he punished them for the slightest misbehavior, believing that in this way educates real men. On April 30th, 2011, at 3:57 a.m., emergency services received a call. The caller was Brett Sickett and reported that his wife, Washee, had set the house on fire and committed suicide. The man also said the children were inside, but he was able to save them. He tried to pull his wife out, but the flames were too strong. When services arrived at the scene, they could no longer save anyone. After the fire was put out, the charred body of a woman was found on the 2nd floor in a bedroom. Washee was lying on her side as if she was asleep. Brett explained that during the night, his wife woke him up and asked him to get the children from the upstairs. When he got upstairs, he saw the flames and tried to save his wife, but was unable to. After calling the police, Brett explained that his wife had been in an unstable emotional state recently. He speculated that Washee may not have been able to handle herself and started the fire. They had just discussed divorce the day before, and that may have pushed her to take such a step. However, questions remained. Why had she endangered the children, and why had she destroyed the house? Washee's relatives were sure that she could not have done it. They described her as a caring mother who loved her children and was willing to fight for her life. Her sister Kathleen claimed that Washee had started making plans for the future, was going on vacation, and was actively working to improve her life. The investigation continued, and detectives had to figure out whether the tragedy was a murder or whether Washee took her own life. The threats from her husband began long ago. He was adamant about the divorce and did not want to let Washee go. The husband said that he could do something to her and nothing would be done to him for it. He believed that because of his police skills, he could make it look like an accident and he would be believed. However, the investigators did not jump to conclusions and began to scrutinize the evidence, of which there was enough. First, at the scene of the fire, forensics found a lot of interesting things. For example, there was a canister of gasoline near the fire, indicating deliberate arson. Secondly, the gun that was used to shoot the deceased was under her body, barrel down, which raised a lot of questions. David Fetty, senior special agent in charge of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, said that if Washee had shot herself while lying down, the gun would have fallen to the floor. If she had been sitting up, the weapon should have remained on her right side, but its position was clearly odd. The trajectory of the bullet raised even more questions, but it took time for the experts to sort out all the details. Also found in Washee's bag was a notebook with a farewell note in which she wrote that she could no longer fight and said goodbye to her husband and sons. She asked Brett to take care of the children and for the boys to be strong and forgive her. Washee promised to watch over everyone from heaven. Despite the obviousness of what was happening, there were many inconsistencies in the case, as if someone was trying to fit everything into the right version. Authorities began looking into the couple's lives and interviewed those around them. The Forrest family revealed that Washee had recently filed for divorce, and a couple days later she was gone. Everyone knew that Brett was pressuring her, but no one believed he was capable of such a thing. Everyone thought that the divorce process would be a long one. Washee was afraid her husband would take the children, so she put up with it all for many years. Everyone described Brett as withdrawn and secretive. He had almost no friends, and his colleagues at work thought he was arrogant. He was the complete opposite of his wife. Eventually, Washee's patience ran out and she decided to separate. Everyone knew that Brett was furious when he found out and even canceled a dinner with friends. He stated that he would do everything he could to prevent his wife from seeing the children. Such a future frightened Washee, so she took her sons and went to a friend's house for the night to give her husband time to cool down and adjust to the new reality. Washee hoped Brett would pack up and leave, but he stayed, saying he needed time to find a new place to live. His words touched her kind heart, and she decided to return home, hoping for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. However, tragedy soon struck. When investigators interviewed neighbors, one woman said that on the night of April 30th around 3:15, she heard pops that woke her up. The witness's words raised suspicion because it was unclear why Brett didn't call an ambulance until 42 minutes later. Brett was a police officer and was well aware that the delay could have led to tragedy. In addition, the experts listened to the recording of Brett's call again. His voice was cold and indifferent, as if he didn't care. Next, the investigators spoke with a therapist the couple had been seeing. The specialist revealed that Washee was worried about her husband's reaction and his threats. She shared that one day, Brett confessed that he dreamed of killing her. This frightened Washee, but she did not believe that he was capable of such a thing. A psychotherapist characterized Brett as a narcissist with psychopathic tendencies. Autopsy results showed that there were no traces of carbon monoxide or smoke in Washee's lungs, which meant she died before the fire. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, but that wasn't the only injury. Doctors found several other wounds on her chest and thighs, which is atypical for someone who decided to end her life. Toxicology tests showed that Washee was not under the influence of illegal substances or alcohol at the time of her death. Brett was called in for questioning, and he was extremely unhappy, not understanding why he was suspected. He assured that he loved his wife and was very worried about her death. He was left alone with 2 children and was psychologically depressed. When asked directly if he was involved in her death, Brett said that if he wanted to kill her, he would have thought of something better. To this, he countered that as a police officer, he knew that fire destroys all evidence. Brett justified that he would never set a house on fire, especially with children inside. He insisted that the threats towards his wife were just an attempt to scare and upset her, but he wouldn't have physically touched her. When asked why Washee allegedly started the fire herself, he was evasive. She hated the house, he said. But no one believed him. Brett claimed that he had rushed into his wife's room to help, but there was no sign of it. No blood, soot, or burns were found on his clothes or body. Through a few days after the death of Yuhi consisted of its luri. Ceremony passed directly in front of the log home. On the funeral came relatives, acquaintances, and unequal people, all grieving the premature death of a woman and a mother of 2 children. Brandon and Bronson said that their mom is now in heaven. Malchik Molly to God returned her. Those who came to the funeral said only good things about Washee, remembering her kind character. Rumors spread through the town, and everyone found it hard to believe that she could have left her children to be raised by a tyrannical husband. The investigation moved quickly. Brett's clothes, which he wore on the night of the fire, were sent for examination, and they found drops of gasoline on them. It was a strong piece of evidence against him. Forensic examination of the laptop, which miraculously was not damaged, showed that a request had been made from it before the fire to get rid of the evidence. Moreover, a thorough examination of the scene revealed traces of arson. Washa's handwritten note was also checked, and experts found that her handwriting was forged. The trajectory of the bullet was examined in detail, and experts concluded that the shot was fired from a distance that Washee could not have done it herself. In May 2011, Brett was arrested on charges of murdering his wife, arson, and endangering the lives of his children. 2 years later, the trial began. The prosecutor's office insisted on Brett's guilt and presented all the evidence, which was so obvious that those present in the courtroom were left in no doubt. Among the witnesses were experts in handwriting, ballistics, forensic scientists, and a psychotherapist. Connie Sudman, a family counselor, admitted that hours after his wife's death, Brett called her and confessed what he had done. At trial, Brett tried to justify that his words had been misunderstood. After numerous examinations, it became clear that the farewell note had been forged. On the morning of April 29th, Brett had no intention of leaving home. But not because he had nowhere else to go, but for another reason. He was planning something terrible. On the night of April 30th, when everyone was asleep, Brett took a .44 Magnum pistol, went into his wife's bedroom and shot her several times. He then set the house on fire, got the children out and called emergency services. The prosecutor said the motive for such a brutal crime was a sense of ownership and a desire for revenge. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. In the end, 37-year-old Brett was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years for murder, 5 years for arson, and 1 year for endangering the lives of his sons. Brett was extremely unhappy with the sentence, and even dared to tell the jury and judge that they were going to hell. Brett later appealed, but the verdict remained unchanged. After numerous trials, Washee and Brett's children were placed in the care of Kathleen Forrest. The fact is that there was a fierce battle between Washee and Brett's families for custody of the children, but in the end, the court sided with Washee's family. Brett is currently serving time in a correctional facility outside of Kansas. He was transferred there because former law enforcement officers are not usually held with the criminals they once incarcerated. So tragically ended a story that once seemed like a happy family. Brett, who was once a model husband and father, ended up ruining everything he had. His act left a deep wound not only in the hearts of his loved ones, but also in the souls of his young sons, who will have to live with the memory of what happened. After the verdict, life continued to move forward, but the shadows of this tragic event remained for a long time. Washee's family tried to surround their children with care and love so that they could overcome the pain of loss. But time doesn't heal everything. Brett, sitting in a jail cell, was never able to accept his guilt to the end, persistently blaming those around him for his fate. The story of how one decision and indomitable anger can destroy the lives of several people at once became a lesson for many. No matter what happens in life, there is always a choice: to seek a peaceful way out or to follow the path of revenge and destruction. Unfortunately for Brett, the choice was made too late. This story was a reminder of the importance of maintaining humanity even in the most difficult situations. And that true strength is not in controlling others, but in the ability to maintain love and respect even when things go wrong. No one will bring Vaska back to life, but her memory lives on in the hearts of her children and those who knew her as a kind, bright, and strong woman.